We start with what you may have heard there. I know you couldn't see the pictures, but what you heard from your people on the streets of the capital who want your government to be tougher. What would you say to them?
I think the message we've already sent is that we will use every diplomatic and political option to pursue a path at the United Nations as well, to show the world what India has done. Let's consider what India has done by this action, which is illegal, illegitimate and unlawful. What they have done is to fly in the face of Security Council resolutions that have been there on the Council's agenda for 70 years. 11 Security Council resolutions. They have violated them. They have violated international law. They don't wish to talk to Pakistan to find a peaceful settlement of this outstanding dispute. And as your news story showed, they have turned 14 million people, over 14 million people in occupied Kashmir into prisoners. This is an armed camp that they have created, and this is a serious situation which poses a grave threat to peace and security in our region.
I do want to ask you about your talks at the UN, but first just what you were talking about in reaction to what the people in Islamabad were saying. Is it fair to say there's some mixed messaging coming from Pakistan? Your Prime Minister said very recently, in fact, that he doesn't want war. It would be absolutely disastrous, is what he said in Parliament. But your Chief of the Army was saying the Pakistan Army stands firmly by the Kashmiris. We are prepared and will go to any extent to fulfill our obligations. That sounds like war is on the table.
No, war is not on the table. Pakistan does not wish to see a conflict. Pakistan will not do anything to escalate the situation. The aggressor and the country that's escalated the situation and taken us to the edge of the precipice is India. And I think what we will do at the United Nations is to take up the issue with the Security Council. After all, the UN has outstanding responsibilities to deal with this issue. There are Security Council resolutions, as I explained to you earlier, and what we had yesterday was a very strong statement from the Secretary General of the United Nations, which validated these Council resolutions and said this issue must be resolved according to the UN Charter. And the UN Charter, what is integral in the UN Charter, is the right of self-determination. I think what's at stake here is the destiny, the future, and the lives of over 14 million people who've been turned into hostages. There is huge military presence in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So I think what you will see my country doing is to take this issue up at the diplomatic level and use all political means to ensure that we get justice for the Kashmiri people. I think our message to the Kashmiri people is you're not alone. You will never be alone. We are with you, and we will continue to do whatever we can to ensure that your plight. Look, Tom, ultimately this issue, in the first instance, this issue is about human suffering. It's about the plight of a people who've been deprived of their liberty for over 70 years. And now they're on the edge of being deprived of everything else. They cannot leave their homes. Their leaders have been arrested. There are food shortages. And above all, now there is an assault on their very identity. So Pakistan will stand with the people of Kashmir, and we will do whatever we can to ensure that there is justice.
You rightly call out those human rights abuses, and you just said, you know, we are with you, the people of Kashmir. You highlight their human suffering correctly. But is it slightly hypocritical, given that Pakistan was on a list of countries who praised China's contribution to international human rights causes for what large proportions of the international community consider internment in forced labour camps in Xinjiang, all of whom are Muslims?
Why are we changing the narrative? Why are we changing the subject
here? You're rightly calling out human rights abuses. You're rightly calling out human rights abuses, which you should do across the board.
The issue is of international law. There are Security Council resolutions, as I said. There are 2 reports of the United Nations on human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. We have to keep the focus on a crisis that is brewing in our region. We don't want this crisis to spin out of control. We would like the international community to step up to the plate, to stand on the side of law, justice, and fairness, and also to deliver on the pledges that were made to the people of Kashmir by the Indian leadership itself. Years and years ago, Indian leaders pledged and promised a plebiscite for the people of Jammu and Kashmir so that they could freely decide their destiny. So if you believe in democracy, and if you believe in liberty, and if you believe in human rights, Why is it denied to the people of occupied Kashmir? I think
but you don't think that those same rights, you should stand up for them for people in the countries very close to you in China?
That's not the issue. That's not the issue under discussion right now. What we will be taking up with the Security Council is the issue which is before us, before this crisis spins out of control.
Okay, let me ask you about Antonio Gutierrez and the UN in general. Then, do you really have confidence in the UN stepping up to the plate? Because his statement, which was supportive of you, also said that he recalls the 1972 agreement on bilateral relations between India and Pakistan, which states that the final status of Jammu and Kashmir is to be settled by peaceful means. Do you think he's distancing the UN from a key role in this with that statement?
Not at all. Not at all. By validating and referring to UN Security Council resolutions, by also expressing his concern that these restrictions are going to exacerbate the human rights situation in occupied Kashmir, we are satisfied with this statement, and we really think that it will be up to the Security Council now to address this issue. It is a major issue. It is a major threat to international peace and security. And also, it is an issue of whether we want to live in a rules-based international order where people abide by Security Council resolutions, or do we want to live in a world where countries get up and unilaterally take actions that pose a threat to not just their neighbor, but to the whole world, actually.
Can I ask you about the reaction of Muslim-majority countries? Saudi Arabia was part of a statement that was released, but they've refrained from taking a position. There are reports that your Prime Minister personally telephoned the leaders of some Muslim-majority states, and there's been a muted reaction. Indeed, the United Arab Emirates has praised India, arguing that the revocation of Article 370 will improve social justice and security. Are you disappointed in the reaction of some of your what could be allies?
Tom, for a start, I think you've had somebody's given you very selected press reports.
So the Prime Minister hasn't spoken. Your Prime Minister hasn't spoken to any Muslim-majority countries.
I've just had a meeting with the Saudi ambassador to the United Nations. He's expressed his full support for my country's position here at the UN. I have been meeting with other Muslim countries here. We have had a strong statement from the Secretary General of the OIC, which is the Organization of Islamic Countries. We are confident that our Muslim brothers and sisters will stand by us. But the question I have to ask, Western countries who lecture the whole world about human rights, what about the human rights of the people of occupied Kashmir? I mean, you take up cudgels for everyone else.
Would you like, therefore, to hear more from the United States and the United Kingdom?
We would certainly like to hear more from the United Kingdom, which is responsible for the dispute in the first place. Let's not forget, this is something which is the unfinished business of a colonial era. So yes, we certainly would like to hear. But you know, above all, Tom, what we'd like countries to take positions on is the issue of the plight of a people who were made promises. These promises are enshrined in UN Security Council resolutions. Those were agreed. These are international documents. They were signed. Countries signed up to them. So the question we have to ask is, are these Security Council resolutions going to be cast aside? And are we going to allow geopolitics to color our position on this? And I think ultimately countries will come down on the side of justice and, of course, on the side of peace. Because above all, I mean, the mood that I find at the UN, and I can share that with you, is one of shock and deep concern about the action that the Indian government has taken. My country has not done anything.
Not apathy, though. You don't sense there's a reluctance to want to get involved at the UN?
I think countries are being lobbied and briefed right now. All of these diplomacy is a process. It's not an event. And it doesn't take place as a news story. So it takes a while to get people to be fully briefed so that know the full picture. Plus, look at the situation on the ground in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. What your reporter just sent you a news report. What does that say? What that says is that the curfew and the restrictions on people's very movement is in place. What will happen? After all, curfews are not permanent. What will happen when these curfews come off, when they end? The anger of the Kashmiri people will be heard loud and clear across the world. So
just one final. Sorry, yes, we're running slightly short on time. I do just want to ask you one final question. Apologies for interrupting. You mentioned the UK. When it comes to the President of the United States, Imran Khan seems to have asked him for some help previously. Was that the right decision?
Yes, of course it's the right decision. You know, you mentioned the Simla Agreement and a bilateral dialogue. When the other country does not want to be a partner for peace, we then look towards the world and we look towards mediators, we look towards the United Nations. We are ready for bilateral, multilateral, any format, so long as we can get justice for the people of occupied Jammu and Kashmir.